Welcome, Professor Markus Tomaselli. We are here with a guest. I'm not quite sure if it's not probably the first broadcasting in English of our podcast here at the Order of Romanian Architects, the Bucharest branch of the Order of Romanian Architects, and we have a guest from Vienna, from the Technische Universität, the Institute for Urban Design and Landscape Design. So, if you could tell us a few words about you, about your institution, and about why you are here in Bucharest.
Okay. The institution I'm head of is the Institute of Urban Design and Landscape Architecture, as you told already. It's part of the Faculty of Architecture and Spatial Planning. And our department, our institute, serves to both ways of education, spatial planners and architects. We are in a project involved that is called Living 2060, and that's why I'm here in Bucharest, because we also have an exhibition here at the House of the Order about projects that have been done by students from our university, but also from colleagues from Italy and Indonesia, about, let's summarize it, about the housing question, about topics that are related to social housing in different cultural embeddings.
As far as I know, Austria is a sort of a world champion of social housing, whereas Romania completely gave up its social housing. We have less than 1% of the building stock. What about your collaborations with Indonesia? What is to learn about social housing and social cohesion in Indonesia, and how does this work in such an international environment? How do students deal with it, having this different background? Some coming from Italy, some from Austria, some from Thailand as well.
Yeah, let's just back to one point that you mentioned, that Austria is somehow the capital of social housing. It's Vienna. Because it's only Vienna that is so much engaged in social housing, and nearly 30% of our inhabitants live in subsidized housing, or even in apartments that are owned by the cities itself. In other parts of Austria, it's not like that. But Vienna, for sure, is a hotspot in social housing, and I will tell about that also in my lecture today. Coming back to your question about the cooperation with other institutions and other universities in different cultural embeddings, I would say that this is exactly what Austrian students need. They need to open up their view to other cultural and also other climatic circumstances. That means that they have to rethink their approach to housing, as there are different needs on both sides. One side coming from the cultural needs of the society, and on the other hand coming from the climate conditions that the constructions have to deal with, or the opportunities that you have by different climate conditions, as we face cold winters in Austria, but you don't do that in Indonesia. But you have a rainy season there, and so there are different topics that have to be fulfilled. And as we teach our students to an international market, not to the Austrian only, I think it's very important for them to have these experiences.
So there are at least two things that are coming up from what you said. One is this need for flexibility that has to be taught since a very early age, this opening towards other problems. Of course, the most obvious one is that of a very different climate that you actually have to experience, with your body to see how heat works.
Yeah, definitely.
And of course, the other way around for people from warm climates. They have little idea what cold or extreme cold is. But then we talk about these young people who will become architects and urban planners. And I would make a small parallel with a small comparison with the situation in Romania, where urban planning is struggling to gain independence from architecture. You're still together in the same institution. How does it work for professionals in Austria? Because of course you can have some ambitions in an university and produce specialists of different sorts, but then you have to practice your job. And we are broadcasting for our
urban planners
colleagues that are architects and urban planners. And architects have been told and educated that they are also urban planners, and some of them are, but maybe not all of them. That's a question.
But that's the same in Austria. We have these two fields of studies: architecture and spatial design, spatial planning and urban planning. But in fact, it is the chamber that gives you the right to work in a position, and especially for the architecture, the field you are allowed to work in also includes urban planning. But many of the urban planners or the students that absolve the study urban planning in our faculty, they will not become members of the chamber, because they are also allowed in technical offices to do the same planning, because there is no authority planning behind it. The planning has to be approved by a political institution. Usually it's the council or something like that. And therefore the plan drawer or the plan developer itself doesn't need to have this, let's say, this oath on the state that he is allowed to do this kind of planning, while the architect has that. He needs to be proven by the Chamber of Architects that he is able to plan buildings. So this is a difference, and this also makes it, let's say, similar to Romania, as I understood you, a very two fields of a business that is not really interacting with each other too much. And this is, of course, a topic that we also face in our faculty, that we have specialists on two fields and the communication among them is not as good as we would like to. Our institution, or the institution I'm head of, is one of these bridge institutions that are serving both the study field of planning as well as architecture. And we try to bring these guys together also during their studies.
So, do you consider yourself an architect or an urban planner? How does it work for you in personal terms?
In personal terms, I'm an architect because I was educated as an architect. And my professional work is architecture, not planning.
I have to confess that there's a bit of complicity in between us, because I was the guest of Technische Universität, also part of a design studio. And I noticed the very, very good quality of the students. They're excellent students who were able to deliver wonderful projects during the course of a semester. And also noticing that they sort of cover a certain area which largely overlaps with the Ottoman Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Now, we don't know if the European Union is replacing perfectly these fallen empires, but you have more experience with this because you are exposed to this flow of students coming from all the countries around. And does it work? What are your expectations?
You mean the cooperation between the students, or what do you mean by does it work?
And also the larger question, is this how Europe is going to work with people studying in one country and practicing in another country and then keeping their cooperation alive? Because Living 2060 is about an even more expanded version of it, which is the cooperation with Southeast Asia.
I think in many cases it will fail, of course. Yeah, people have their interests very personally, and they are embedded in their societies and in their villages. So 300 people are in your life and you're living with them, and they can be very local. But I think from a couple of points of view, it's very enriching if you have contact with other people from with another cultural background during your studies or during your life. And I think that our university, focusing on this, as you mentioned, area of the former Austrian-Hungarian Empire and also maybe some parts of the Ottoman Empire, is somehow providing that. On two ways. One is that we are also working in these countries. We are doing projects together with universities. I just came from Pristina. We did a project in Pristina with colleagues from Tirana and Pristina. So, and we do an exhibition there to show the results of these projects. And on the other hand, we are hosting a lot of students from these countries. So they are in a very intense contact with our students, or with students that come from Germany, because they also want to go to Vienna to study. It's a nice city, and maybe they don't come because of the university, they come because of the nightlife, I don't know. But anyway, it's a mixed culture that we have in our faculty, which is really enriching both the students among each other, but also us as professors.
Good. Let's switch to your experiences with Romania, and maybe particularly with Bucharest, because it's not the first time you're here. And we are, of course, obsessed with Bucharest, to the extent that many people think it's the most congested city in the world, or the fifth most congested or something, because they read some crazy statistics. But then looking at our own city through the eyes of somebody who visits it just from time to time, but also has a professional view. What's your experience with this city? Mainly opposed to Vienna, which I recently visited.
I would say that what is fascinating in this city is its multi-layered structure. And this is not existing that intensively anymore in Vienna. So Vienna has been homogenized in the time, especially in the monarchy. And Romania hasn't been that much homogenized. It has its boulevards from different periods and in different extension. But behind the facade of this boulevard, you still have the feeling of the old villages and this Osman structure. So it is incredibly surprising, and it's an incredible surprising city. When you lose your way, you will always be enriched with extremely wonderful situations in the backyards. I really liked that a lot. When we came here the first time, it was a student project together with Jon Minko, and we worked on Titan Ma. I don't know if this area still exists, but it was an old factory, I think a steel factory or something like that. But I don't know.
Marble.
Marble, okay.
They have a huge,
it was already abandoned.
Real estate project there.
Okay.
33 stories high.
Oh, still these towers?
Yeah.
The towers of democracy? I was told like that in a lecture.
There will be towers.
Yeah. Anyway, it was right behind the new cathedral, I think, somewhere in this part.
Not very far.
Not very far from that. And we did projects that in mixed groups, students from here as well as students from Austria. And this was very impressive and very exciting. Then we came back later to show, also as we did now in Pristina, to show the results in a small exhibition. And I think that what changed during the time here in Bucharest is that I see a lot of investments in real estate, but in general, and I have the same impression also in Vienna from time to time, in general, I think the money could have been spent more useful for a long-term development of the city. Not maybe for the revenue, the short-term revenue. There are many investments missing in the historic buildings in Romania, and especially in Bucharest, I think. And this is somehow a pity to me, as I also teach urban renewal and all these heritage issues in my institute. I have a very sad eye on the situation on historic buildings here in Bucharest.
Lots of abandoned buildings.
Lots of abandoned buildings. In extremely prominent situations, just down there on the river, on the other side of the park, we just passed by a couple of minutes ago, there is a beautiful old villa, totally abandoned, becoming a ruin. It's really sad.
Now, we talked a lot and we still come back to students, which are, of course, very important for people working in a university. But then we should look at practitioners, because we also had a guest from Indonesia raising the question of empathy in architecture. Mm-hmm. And he came to the conclusion that is quite logical also to me, that architects are not really empathic. They tend to usually serve the interest of their clients. Now, coming back to the social housing question, or the housing question as Engels would have put it, why do we need social housing?
Affordability is maybe another word for solving this problem. We have different financial capacities in a society. And if we are not dealing with social housing at all, like many countries do, you will have an effect that those people that have less capacity, less financial capacity, they will have to migrate to places where they can afford their residential needs. And this is, on one hand, causing a segregation. That means a separation of different income classes within one urban or one regional situation. And this is usually causing social costs at the end. So if you put that money not in crime prevention and drug dealing and prevention and whatever, you could do it also with housing. And then you have a better social stability in your society. What is even more important than just putting money into the social housing market is that you have a proper mixture of it. That means you should not exclude middle class. You should not exclude certain areas. Then I think you have an opportunity to provide the society a situation that is quite stable.
Well, thank you for the answer. There was an incredibly condensed answer to at least 4 major issues, because my question has a bit of a rhetorical sound. But then you sort of explained why Romania has now reached, I mean, officially we're 19 million, but probably just 16 to 17 million are in the country at any given time, from a population of 23 million. So we lost at least 5 million people because they migrated. And a major reason for their migration is the fact that they couldn't afford to live here. And that was because there was no affordable housing, of course.
I think there was a long tradition of social housing in all these former communist countries, because housing was a public issue. And I think the main disaster happened during the transformation process.
Transition.
Transition.
We call it transition.
You call it transition.
Yeah,
okay.
Transition.
This transition process is steered by companies that don't have, from my point of view, the best reputation in the world. Like, I won't name them. They helped the governments to become more capitalistic and somehow compatible with the markets in different ways. By this transition, they brought the former social facilities of the nation into private hands. And this also happened in housing. So you have now, what I saw, for example, in Sofia, is that you have a restitution of land on one hand, and then you have the privatization of apartments within the buildings, the residential buildings. And the restitution of the land where the building stands on means that you have 3 or 4 owners of the land and you have 300 owners of the apartments. This is causing a situation where no investment at all is possible anymore. This is blocking itself totally. And this was steered by these wonderful consultants that we have in our economy. I think we have to find a way to bring these real estates into a form of organization that allows us again to deal with it. For example, in Austria, where this process didn't happen, we have a lot of housing owned by organizations that are also owned by the residents. That means the residents are a stakeholder of an institution, of a company that is owning the residential blocks.
Do you call them cooperatives?
Yes, kind of, yeah. And I think that helps a lot to get a little bit more flexibility into the situation with renovation, especially with technical maintenance and also with the public space around the buildings, which is also abandoned. The responsibility left is gone for these areas.
The last topic that you addressed in your answer was about social mix, and I remember attending my first sociological conference 20 years ago in Ljubljana, and half of what was on the table, the discussions were about achieving social mix or recovering from segregation. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't understand very well because Romania was still the beneficiary of a form of forced social mix. In Romania, everything was mixed. University professors would live in the same apartment block with people working in a steel factory and all that. So there was, of course, a social differentiation, but there was a lot of mix. Mm-hmm. Then I experienced a bit of the Western societies, and I realized how much segregated they are. And now we are on the road to segregate our society as well. You mentioned that Vienna is probably an example of a good social mix, but it's just Vienna. What do you think is the future of it, besides this singularity of Vienna, who often gets the title of the most livable city in the world? You compete with Toronto or
Melbourne, I think, and Zurich, and
Ottawa.
So on.
That's a club of
a club
champions.
Of first world cities. Yeah,
first world
Nobody
cities.
mentioned Rio, and I love it.
Yeah.
No, but I would like to point out an example that happened in Rio. That's why I mentioned it, because I got acquainted with the urban planner, the director of urban planning in Rio de Janeiro. And he had a brilliant idea about this segregation topic. They have, of course, a very, very intensively segregated society. So poor people are living in the outskirts, in informal settlements, in very bad conditions, usually dealing with landslides and floodings and all disasters you can imagine, while the rich people live in high-rise buildings, heavily fenced, like jails. And they create their own reality somehow. Yeah? That is not anymore part of the urban environment. And by giving the license to real estate companies to build these kind of buildings, residential buildings for richer people or for the upper class, he combined it with the need to reuse the abandoned office buildings in the city center for social housing. So he brings back those that are living in the outskirts into the city center, to the neighborhood of the well-known banks, real estate companies, offices, and so on. And this totally abandoned city effect, about this empty streets in the night where office buildings are closed, just the guards are sitting around behind glasses.
Maybe COVID crisis helped.
Yeah, that helped a lot. And this was a result of the COVID crisis, because the Home Office made these buildings abandoned. And now they are inhabited again by people which are behaving totally different, because they have no commuting anymore. Mm-hmm. They have a lot more time to invest in their social activities.
So these are the two other topics that you introduced. It's planning and policies. Mm-hmm. So we need planning, and planning is quite often connected with a model. So that's why I keep asking about Vienna, not just because you represent Vienna here, but because Vienna is a vivid model, a model that we're looking at when we think about our city. Mm-hmm. Though we know that Bucharest has an obsession with Paris, it should have with Istanbul, because in my opinion, Bucharest is a small Istanbul, not the little Paris, but more like little Istanbul. But so planning models, but then policies that you mentioned about Rio, because I guess not all the cities in the world can become Vienna or should become Vienna. Maybe some of them belong to a different paradigm, to a different model. As you experienced Bucharest as being a multi-layered, very, very diverse city, completely surprising, and you enjoyed it. We oscillate between loving our city and hating this diversity, and struggling to align it to contemporary standards, high-rise buildings and high-quality architecture, which I found, have to say, it's very much homogenized as a style. You can see buildings which look perfectly the same in Oslo, Rio, Absolutely. Istanbul, and Bucharest.
It's an industry.
It's an industry of design.
It's an industry of building materials, and that creates design. You have the same window companies working all over the world. You have the same facade companies working all over the world. They sell the same products all over the world. Doesn't matter if it's Oslo or Dubai. So at the end, the building looks like a building built with the same materials.
A collection of materials, like a catalog.
Exactly.
A catalog
We had
of
that in
materials.
the so-called Gründerzeit, in this explosive time when cities grew in the beginning of the industrialization as well. All the decorative elements that have been used in these classicistic buildings, they came from a catalog. And you have the Titan carrying your balcony from the same company, I think 50 times in a city. So this was more regional at that time. So we have a difference in the architecture between Paris, Vienna, Istanbul, or Bucharest. But the idea behind it was a similar one. It's just the globalization that added a new uniformity in architecture and building design all over the world. So that's sad, but yeah, it happened.
So there's a need for policies to counterbalance, of course, not architectural style, but maybe, or market failures or social failures. Can we teach students or can we do it ourselves? Because in some places of the world, and I specifically mentioned here Bucharest, there are no active policies or there are just very few active policies to counterbalance unpleasant phenomena in the city. How should we, who has to deal with policies? Because we know that policies is not politics. Yeah. And we, as architects and urban planners, tend to see ourselves as being qualified to
develop policies
and share our wisdom.
Yeah.
Are we?
I don't think we are, but nobody really is. So it doesn't make us less qualified than others. But what we should develop in our students, especially because they are the next generation, they have to deal with the world in the future, is the sensibility for these topics. And when you ask students to define the problem that they would like to solve with their design, then you bring them very close to these topics, because then they start seeing that it's not about the entrance hall or the toilet or the kitchen within the floor plan. It is about how is the building placed in the public surrounding? What is the dialogue between the inside and the outside? Or in which embeddings, economical, social, but also architectural, is this proposal located? And I think defining or seeing the problem which you want to address with your project is the entrance hall, let's say, to awareness of policies.
Now I will expand a bit the scale. You probably don't know about the new Metropolitan Act in Romania, so Metropolitan Governance, which says that different entities can collaborate if they wish. So there's no obligation to coordinate in between different, between a city and its suburbs.
Okay. Yeah.
But if they want, they can do that. Of course, as an urban planner, you know a lot of things about different forms of suburbanization, and touring the Balkans, you for sure noticed what is going on in this part of the world, where regional planning was largely abandoned. What do you think is the future of suburbanization in Balkans, Eastern Europe? How does it look in comparison with other models? How can we deal with this?
But it's a difficult question. It is something that is not. I think it's partly a question that is institutional. When we look at France, for example, where you have much more centralized authorities that somehow make it maybe easier to protect enclosed settlements and avoid sprawl. It seems to me like that. I never studied it in detail, but it's my impression. But about what's going on here and in the Balkans or in Vienna, which is part of the Balkan, is the same. And we also have this possibility of cooperation between different entities. For example, Vienna and its surrounding part of Austria, it's called the Bundesland, a county, Lower Austria, there is no need to cooperate between those two institutions or those two entities. They can if they want. They don't want, of course, because the result of, let's say, planning is mostly a financial one. That means if you locate a shopping mall very close to the border of the city of Vienna, you address the customers of the city of Vienna. Much more people living there than in the surrounding of Vienna in Lower Austria. That means you have a lot more clients and they are paying their taxes, their sales taxes, and you get the workplaces and all these kind of things.
It's a fight over money.
It's a fight, yes.
It's a fight over money.
And this fight is wonderfully heating up this urban sprawl. The same is with residentship. The same is with land for building purposes and all these kind of things. The result is traffic jam. The result is a lot of difficulties.
People commuting for many kilometers just to reach their residence. Yeah.
But this is unavoidable if you have autonomous entities. So you need to work and rethink the structure according to its economic zoning and not to its political or to administrative boundaries. That's the problem we have.
Well,
but we have it everywhere.
I'm really afraid of this because of the functional urban areas. That is a very popular concept in urban planning nowadays. Or is it urban planning? Is it economic planning? So functional urban areas are a buzzword, is a buzz term. What do you reckon of it?
I think that it is not really helping to avoid this sprawl. But I think other circumstances will help reducing this movement to the outskirts. It is the costs of transportation. It is the cost of energy as a whole. That makes mobility more expensive. That makes the maintenance of single-family homes, for example,
an individual house,
unaffordable. Yeah. Overlapped by a demographic change where the societies in Europe are getting older and older everywhere, not only in Austria and Germany, but also in the southern countries and I think also in Romania and Bulgaria. So you have a lot of old people living in single-family homes where the children already left with 250 square meters without any help to maintain the whole situation. That's let's say maybe not wished, but an effect that will change a little bit the sprawl movement that we face at the moment.
Now, there is a term that is introduced in the name of your institution, which is landscape design. So what about landscape? We don't address enough the landscape question, but it appears to be central to planning.
I think you can't underestimate landscape design because it's extremely important in the livability of any built environment. Of course, landscape includes also the unbuilt land that is used for agriculture, forests, biodiversity, and so on. But in the context that we are dealing with landscape as architects and urban planners, it is the public space, the parks, the streets, the environment that is close to your home and close to your workspace. And to increase the quality of these spaces, I think we can contribute a lot in the quality of life to everybody. At the moment, this is very much occupied by these steel constructions that we sell for a little money called cars. But this is something where at least a movement against this occupation is already starting in many cities. And the transformation process as usually starts in the Scandinavian countries, maybe in Western Europe more than in Vienna or Eastern Europe. But there is a strong wish to improve the quality of public space. And this is combined with all these microclimatic effects that we have to deal with caused by the global warming, a strong topic in landscape architecture, at least at our institution.
So this is a strong statement that landscape is public space actually, because the question is who owns the landscape. We know that public space is owned by everybody or the state in different societies, but then who has a right to manage it? So what about the collective action? Is it a technical thing? Because when you say landscape architect or landscape designer, it's usually somebody who gives advices about what species of trees have to be planted in a certain area, which is trees and benches. It's not a major thing to do. But then landscape is also about having access to a view, or just
ventilation.
As you mentioned, general ventilation of a city.
Yes, exactly.
Ventilation of a city.
No,
so
we have landscape.
Who owns it? Who can do it? How can we do that?
I think it's a public topic. It's not only because it's mostly public ground we are dealing with. It's also because it influences the city as a whole, or the built environment as a whole. It must not be a city.
So it should be political.
It is political. It is very much political, I think. And it becomes more political when you think about France and the heat waves and 60,000 people dying. Then microclimate becomes a public issue. Then it's a responsibility of the politicians to avoid overheating of cities. And this is something that is slowly developing in those brains, but also in the societies, that we have to maintain water, because there is a strong change in the amount of water we have to deal with, or in dryness, periods of dryness. So there are a lot of topics now coming together to keep our cities livable that are related to landscape architecture. I think landscape architecture is the most important issue we will have to deal with in the next couple of decades, because then it might be too late if we don't address it in time.
I just experienced, I was in a suburb in the city of Timișoara, and some people were not able to take their showers because their neighbors would water their garden. So they had to share a common resource, which was local water, which was not enough for otherwise wealthy people living in individual houses in some outskirts. So that perfectly confirms the idea that it can be a visible thing or less visible, but sharing and managing common resources, commonalities.
I think
commons.
We are facing these issues this summer intensively in Italy, northern Italy, in southern France, but also in California, where we have water levels in the basins extremely low, no snow in the mountains. That means we will not fill up those basins anymore. That will cause a ration to the use of water. That will cause that car washing is prohibited. Yeah, as much as people love their car, but it's just wasting a resource we need to survive. And watering the garden, something like that. Yeah? So this is an issue we have to deal with. Yes, definitely.
I will just launch a provocative question for the end of our meeting. How should we make urban forests? Can we have urban forests?
If we don't do it vertical, I think we could. No, I mean this is
no fake forests, but real forests.
No bosco verticale, because I think these are technical installations, gimmicks that create awareness on one hand. Okay, they are signal. They also need extremely intensive maintenance, and they are creating a high costs of living in those buildings. But yes, I think we have to increase a lot the amount of trees in our cities. There are different perspectives we have to look at these topics. I think one is the microclimate and the water management, which is very much related to the amount of trees you have available for these functions. Then the next is shadow. Shadow is causing a lower temperature of all kind of surfaces.
And it's cheap.
And it's cheap, yes. As long as it grows and you don't have to maintain it a lot, that brings us back to this all kind of facilities you need underground to make a tree grow, or let him survive. So I think it's possible to have a forest in the city, but it needs a technical approach as well. It is not just plant trees and leave them by their own anymore. Maybe this was 30 years ago, but now we have to take care of them as we have to take care about our children.
Thank you very much, Markus, for this wonderful conversation about cities and social housing. And we'll be waiting for you again, because I know you're well connected with Romania, and you know many things about Romania. And next time we will address even more issues from your experience, because we need your vision over our city and country. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation and the possibility of enjoying the hospitality of the people here in Romania. It's always a pleasure to be here.